Welcome to In Focus. A few weeks ago, I released a video of a conversation that I have on an ongoing basis. Every 2 weeks, I have a conversation with John Peterson, who heads up the Arlington Institute. We talk about current events, what's on our mind, and 2 weeks ago, what was on my mind was what was happening in Israel and in the Middle East. I had just come back from speaking at a conference in London. In the video, I say that I was in my hotel room 1 hour before speaking in front of a live audience at this conference when the news feeds began to come through showing what was happening in Israel. Because of the time difference, 7 to 8 hour time difference between the United States and where I was in London, people here in the US had not seen, unless they were up really, really early, they had not seen what was happening. So I had to go onto that stage and offer my presentation, knowing what was happening and also knowing that most people in the audience had no idea what was going on. John and I had a conversation about that. Our team in London, where the YouTube channel is based, posted the video. I checked it out. A couple of days later, there were no comments. And I thought, well, now this is very interesting. Usually we get comments before the videos are even posted. People begin commenting based on the title and the thumbnail. I said, well, one of a couple of things is happening. Either people have seen it and they are afraid to comment publicly about their feelings. That's a possibility. Or people aren't watching it because they're not interested. That didn't seem very likely. Or something else had happened and maybe there was a glitch in the system. So I called the producer of my YouTube channel in London. And I said, what's going on? And he said, well, Greg, we had comments for a period of time. I had to disable the comments because they were so horrendous. People were so cruel to one another. People were talking about killing other people in the comments of the conversation that I had with John Peterson. And I'm sharing this with you now because I believe it's an example of something, an extreme example of something that is probably happening to every one of us if we are all plugged in to the current events of the world, unless we're living in a tent on a mountaintop in Montana or Alaska or, the mountains of Colorado somewhere and not plugged in. We are all being influenced by information that is coming to us, and our response to that information is what our friends and family and the people in the world around us are seeing. It's what's driving comments on my YouTube channel and Facebook and Instagram and everything else. We live our lives and we make our choices. We choose our politics. We choose our friends, our relationships. We heal our bodies based on the way we've been taught to think. And we respond to the events of the world based upon the information that we're receiving that guides our thinking. The reason that I'm saying this, the comments that people were making were based upon information. Some of it was not borne out by the facts. However, it is information that they believe to be true based upon what they have seen in what is called their media silo. This is a term I'm sure many of you in social media are familiar with. If we're using social media at all, any social media, there are algorithms. You've all heard of the algorithms. Those algorithms are smart and they begin to take our views and our perspective. Then they search the internet, the World Wide Web, and they begin to feed us information that supports and reflects the beliefs and the views that we hold, rather than allowing us to see opposing views, opposing beliefs, other ideas. If you rely only on what the algorithm brings into your feed, your view is going to be reinforced and reinforced, and you're going to see it so many times, you're going to believe that everything you're seeing is absolutely true, and you're going to believe that your truth is the truth and everyone else's truth is wrong. This is happening in families. It's happening on the family level at the dinner table where the parents, because of their interests, are tuned in to one kind of information, and the young people, the children, or maybe in their teens, maybe in their 20s or 30s, living at home at the family dinner table, they're tuned into something else. So their feedback that they're getting is creating what is called an information silo, and it's just what it sounds like. It is a wall of information that separates you from other information that is coming to you. Now, this has been happening. This is no secret. I mean, you all probably have a sense, or some of you are social media experts. You know better than I do how this works. This has all happened way after I left the computer industry. I was a senior computer systems designer during the Cold War years. We were dealing with this on a very rudimentary level, nothing like it is right now. So I know many of you are experts and know much more about this than I do. The point that I'm making here is that we are all being influenced by the information that we received. And it's based on information that we're making the choices and that we are choosing sides about what's happening in the world today. And those choices are shredding our families, our communities, our society, our nation, and our world. It's happening to everyone. So I'm going to say to you right now, we are all casualties of a kind of warfare that is so insidious, you do not even know that you're a pawn and that you're being manipulated. You don't know that you're part of the warfare. This is called fifth generational warfare. And that 5-gen warfare is what I want to talk to you about right now. So when we talk about fifth generation warfare, many people have heard of this through science fiction movies and TV series, dramas about terrorism wars in the Middle East and things like that. And the sense for many people is it's all about computer hacking and cyber warfare and things like that. And that can certainly be a part of it. We're going to talk about that. Fifth generational warfare covers a number of domains. And I'm going to go through those domains with you today. What makes this so insidious is that in the past, historically, we've thought of warfare as opposing forces facing off separate from the civilian populations in a battlefield somewhere with weapons and uniforms where people were clearly identified. You knew what side was fighting against the other side. Those are the kinds of wars we've seen throughout history up into the mid 20th century. Terrorism began changing that. And now this fifth generational warfare, it's a kind of warfare that happens in phases. And the first 3 phases don't happen in the physical world around us. They're happening within us, in our minds, in our hearts, in our emotions. This is about mental and psychological warfare. And it is about feeding us information that leads us to make the choices that support the ideas and the vision and the agendas of other people in charge, rather than imposing changes upon us as a society, as a population. Fifth generation warfare leads us through false information and disinformation and misinformation. It leads us to make the choices that actually support the goals of those agendas and those visions that other people have for your life, for my life, for your world, for my world, for your children. I don't have any children, but I feel very close to the children of this world for a lot of reasons. So it is a kind of warfare that often happens and we don't even know that we are part of the warfare. That's what's happening right now. That's what was happening to the people who were making the comments on my YouTube channel. They were making horrible comments to one another based upon information that was fed to them through mainstream media, and depending upon where that media was based and what the bias of the media was, they were clashing over those ideas. Now, this is happening beyond simply, what's going on in Israel, what's going on in Gaza, what's going on in the Middle East. That happens to be current right now. It's horrible, and I'm going to talk about that in other videos beyond the scope of what I'm doing here. But what I'm doing here applies to everything from climate change and the changes that you and I are being asked to make in our lives Industries are being destroyed. People's lives are being destroyed. The people that can least afford the changes are the ones that are suffering the most. A lot of people making a lot of money based upon the false information and the false narratives of climate change, driven through fifth generation warfare. So let's talk about this. Let's go through this a little bit. 5Gen warfare, what is it? Well, there are domains. Some of them may be apparent, some not so much. First, there's a battle for our thoughts that is coming through what is called information warfare. This is absolutely no secret to anyone. But you might be surprised if you've never seen any of my previous videos on this, where the information comes from. You think about this, all of your opinions, all of your political choices, all of the thoughts and the feelings you have about anything happening in the world, anything around you, everything, it's based on what you have been shown and led to believe is true. Now, here's where this gets really interesting. I'm just going to show you this little comparison. 1983, what you see is 90% of American media, and I'm going to talk about America because America is influencing the world right now. I live in America, so I feel that I'm qualified to talk about this. 90% of our media, so this is television, radio, newspapers, magazines, everything, was owned by 50 corporations, all right? By 2011, that same 90% was controlled by 6 corporations. Now, why is that important? It's important because those corporations are beholden to shareholders. Number one, they have links, economic ties to technology and to corporations that have agendas that benefit them that may not be benefiting the world at large. All right. So when information, when an idea, when a narrative about climate change or about the pandemic or about Ukraine or about the United States involvement in Iraq or Afghanistan or the Middle East or anything, when there is a narrative that needs to be driven so that you and I will make the choices to support the policies and the politicians and the economic choices that are needed to achieve the goal that is the vision of those few, whoever they are. It could be the World Economic Forum, could be United Nations, could be political factions, could be religious factions, could be corporate factions. You get the idea. When a narrative needs to be driven, 6 corporations will determine the language, the words, the phrases that are repeated again and again and again and again. We've all seen video collages of this, where you go from conservative to progressive media, and they're all saying exactly the same words and phrases when it comes to supporting a story. So what we see right now, those 6 corporations, I want you to see this. Who are they? It's General Electric, News Corp, Disney, Viacom, Time Warner, and CBS. I want you to look underneath this. Whoever you're getting your media from is probably listed under one of these, and some of them are buried so deep, it's hard to see it. So, for example, I have a lot of friends that watch MSNBC on especially in the morning. You don't see MSNBC on here. I'm going to show you where it is. It is a subsidiary of Comcast. So it is part of this. There's MSNBC. Then you see what I think is really interesting. News Corp is the owner of Fox. It's also owner of the Wall Street Journal. It's also the owner of the New York Post. I have friends on both sides of the political spectrum that swear by the information that they're getting from one of these 3 sources. And then others on the other side are swearing by information they're getting from one of these 3 sources. They're coming from the same corporation driving the same narrative. And I think it's important for us to see this because we are being divided as a nation. We're being polarized as a nation, as communities, as a society, as families. I'm going to talk more about that in a few minutes. That polarization is only possible based upon the information that we receive and how we are conditioned to think. Now, this chart was 2011. I wanted to update this for you. As of 2022, that's when the last surveys were done. We're still in the year 2023. This still holds. The big 6 corporation, Viacom, CBS, AT&T, News Corp, and Disney and General Electric are the owners of 90%. That leaves 10% that I'm going to talk about later in this conversation, 10% of independent media. So the point is, the information that we receive, that you receive, that drives your political choices, that drives the comments you're making on Facebook and Instagram, my YouTube channels and other people's YouTube channels, that you are absolutely certain are correct and that you know are true, if they are derived from one of these six, there's a good chance that you are a casualty of fifth generational warfare. And I'm going to be very transparent. I am as well, because I am watching those same things as well. However, I'm doing something more than that. And I'm going to talk to you about that before the end of this. But we all are subject to the bias of the information that's coming to us. And this is only the first domain. The second domain is the economic warfare. And this has been happening. It's been happening through the 80s, through the 90s. We're all seeing this. It comes about in different ways. One of the most disappointing and horrible ways that is coming about is through the weaponization of money. You know, I mean, to make a long story very brief, and in the interest of being concise for this video, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this, but the bottom line is, after World War II, the United States and the West talked the world into trusting the US dollar for their currency and their money. Those are two different things. Money and currency are not the same thing. We talked the world into trusting America, and the world bought it. And what is happening and has been happening, any of the players that do not agree with some United States policy or NATO policies or Western policies, that agreement, now we are turning on them, and we're sanctioning the very currency and the money that we told them that they could trust. We sanction them, and there are implications and repercussions to this, and you're seeing it happen right now. Russia was sanctioned because of the Ukraine war. Didn't hurt the leaders; it hurt the everyday people. I have friends in Russia that are you know, really feeling the sanctions. But what it did, Russia said, okay, if United States, if we're not going to work with you for our currency, we're going to turn to other nations, and the nations they have turned to are not our friends. They've turned to Iran. They've turned to China. They are turning to other countries, again, who we don't share the common interest with, that is actually backfiring and playing into a global scenario right now that is leading us down a very, very dangerous path. So the sanctioning, the weaponization of money is one aspect of fifth generation warfare. When you manipulate the currencies, this is actually an aspect of fifth generational warfare. When we devalue our currency, which we are doing with the US dollar, our dollar right now is we've lost 97% of the purchasing value of the US dollar between now when the dollar was instituted early in the 20th century. 97% we have lost because we're devaluing our currency against other currencies. Other countries are now doing the same thing. There's a race to the bottom. Who can devalue their currencies the fastest? Because it has trade implications and export implications and import implications. So these are all aspects of fifth generation warfare. In and of themselves, they have the impact to hurt the economy of a nation. If you're going to go to war with a nation, it's easier to go to war with a nation whose economy is decimated. And that's precisely how this is used. Psychological warfare, I want to talk about this, because we're all casualties of this. In some ways, we're all victims of this. This is the warfare I was talking about that plays out in your mind. And it's tricky because horrible events are happening in war. War is horrible to begin with. Horrible events happened in Ukraine. Horrible events happen in Israel. Horrible events are happening in Gaza. They are happening now. There are images that are being distributed. Some of them are AI fakes, number one. Some of them are images from other wars. that are being brought forward as if they are from the current wars that we're seeing to exacerbate our most primal emotions. And these are typically of the people that can't defend themselves: children, women, unarmed elderly people, civilians. That is a form of psychological warfare, because when you see that, your primal instinct, because you're good people, we are essentially good people, and we want to help those. And so we will make the political choices, we will make the social choices, and you're seeing this in the streets, people protesting in the streets for both sides in Ukraine, people protesting in the streets, both sides, for what's happening in the Middle East, based upon the information that they have seen. So the AI now is playing a big role. Artificial intelligence is creating images of things that did not happen, although horrible things are happening. So some people say, well, it's splitting hairs because those horrible things are happening. But when you see mutilated bodies of infants, there's something or of women or of men who've been mutilated after they have been killed. So this is, I mean, I'm hesitating because I don't want to get into the kinds of things that will keep this video from being shared. But you know what I'm talking about here. When you see those things, there's a primal instinct that wants to, it wants revenge. It wants to somehow retaliate. For most of us, we want to protect. We want to protect those that cannot protect themselves. And the psychological warfare will trigger us to make the financial, the economic, the political, the social decisions that will support whatever the information is leading us to support. And that leads to the political warfare. So it's based on information and psychology and economy that then the political warfare is happening. And this is where we interfere in the politics of other, it runs the gamut. From other communities, the politics of communities, the politics of societies, the politics of nations, including elections. And every nation, the major nations, superpowers, are all part of and complicit in this. The United States has done this for years, China's done it for years, Russia's done it for years, to different and varying degrees, and the technology now makes it more efficient and easier to begin to do this thing. But political warfare is a big part of fifth generational warfare, because then the politics and the politicians that are elected will make the choices to lead to the agenda and the success of the agenda and the vision of the powers that be, that want massive amounts of social engineering and social change. Cyber warfare, I think most of us are familiar with. This certainly can happen with computer viruses, and we've seen that, but it even goes beyond that. It goes beyond hacking, for information. I got a message recently, one of my credit cards said they were letting me know that one of their servers had been hacked. Something like, I don't know, 30 million customers had their information hacked, and be on the lookout for unusual purchases. And interestingly, not long after that, I got a call from the bank, 2 calls. And the first call was asking me if I had just purchased 23 gas grills from Home Depot, which I did not. So somebody had my card and was trying to purchase 23 gas grills. And the other one was asking if I had purchased, it was from one of the phone companies, asking if I had purchased 12 mobile phones, which I had not. So obviously the information had been hacked, and the hackers were trying to use that information. So that's one kind of cyber warfare. But there's another kind that some people that I've spoken with had never even thought about. So much of our infrastructure is run by computers, and it is possible anything that is online can be hacked. And if we don't take the steps to harden that infrastructure, it's easier to hack. Even if it's hardened, it can still be hacked. But why make it easy? So what am I talking about? Our water systems are run by computers. Our electrical systems and the way power is distributed throughout the nation, any nation. I think most of you know electricity, once it's generated today, it has to be used on demand. It's very difficult to store that power. So there's a very complex switching mechanism that routes the energy, the electricity, to whatever part of the nation needs it in that moment in time. And that is vulnerable. It's subject to being hacked. Our nuclear plants are based upon computer systems, our agricultural systems and the agricultural distribution systems and medical systems. All of these are subject to being hacked, cyber warfare, or shutting them down altogether, either shutting them down or causing them to malfunction. So this is an important part of the fifth generation warfare. All of this then may lead to what we call old-fashioned war. The kinetic war is boots on the ground. Now, even the boots on the ground has changed. You're no longer seeing armies clearly marked in uniforms, in formation, facing off against one another in some remote battlefield where everybody else goes about their lives. Kinetic warfare is now happening in the streets of some of the biggest cities in the nation, some of the most beautiful cities. You know, Beirut, Lebanon used to be a beautiful city. It was called the playground for the rich before it was destroyed. That it wasn't some remote battlefield. And we look at what happened in Iraq and what happened certainly in Afghanistan. So kinetic warfare can be a component, but typically these other things happen before the kinetic warfare happens. You know, in the old days in war theory, what would happen is often when the decision was made to go to war with some other entity, whether it was a community or a nation, there would be a campaign. The term was softening up the battlefield before the troops went in. So there would be bombing campaigns, you know, shelling, mortar, fire, cutting off water, food, electricity, things like that. The term is softening them up. And then when the troops went in, it was much easier for them to accomplish their goal. It was the old kind of warfare. In a very real sense, exactly the same thing is happening now with fifth generational warfare, but the softening up comes through misinformation. It comes through the psychological warfare and the economic warfare. That is how the opponent, whoever that is softened up. And then more kinetic kinds of things began happening. So the kinetic warfare is still happening, but it is a part of all of these. When you take all of these domains together and they are implemented to achieve a goal of some entity, some nation, some organization, some vision, it is called hybrid warfare or asymmetrical warfare. And again, it's not like the wars in the old days. And often the population is not even aware that they are at war or that they are participating unknowingly by making decisions based upon the information that's being shared. So hybrid warfare is happening right now. Right now, the United States, there are 32 wars that are raging on the planet right now. The United States has boots on the ground officially in a fighting capacity in 3 of those, but the US is involved in what they call advisory capacities and a number of others. The most recent number I saw was 22. I don't know if that number is accurate. Don't quote me on that. So here's where this gets really, really interesting. It's this fifth generational warfare, the information, the economic, and the psychological warfare, that is what makes political, cyber, and kinetic warfare possible. You can't have the political warfare unless you've got the thinking that says this needs to happen. You can't do the cyber or the kinetic warfare unless the thinking is in place that says this needs to happen. That thinking is the result of the first 3 that you're seeing on the screen right now, leading to that hybrid warfare. So I'm doing this, I know this is fast. I may not be doing justice to the topic. As I said, I know many of you know much more about this than I do, but I want to alert my community and our global family, people that listen to me and follow this, because this is really front and center for us right now. It's up for us right now because the world is choosing sides around events that are happening in the Middle East. And those choices are being made on information that is being fed through our algorithms and through our silos. And again, horrible things are happening needlessly, unnecessarily, on both, I mean, everywhere. It's happening all throughout the Middle East. It's happening in Ukraine. War is insidious. I believe that we are the generation that will outgrow the need for war. I think we will have in our lifetimes, what you're going to see is the powers that be are going to throw a war and nobody's going to show up. I think our young people are not going to. To get to that point, however, I think we are going to see precisely what we're seeing right now. Insidious, and I know I'm using that term a lot, atrocities that our eyes were never meant to see, our minds were never meant to embrace, our hearts were never meant to feel. The kinds of atrocities that we're seeing one human do to another. And I'm going to address this in a separate video, so I don't want to digress here. What I'm saying is I don't think it's over. And we're going to need to deal with what it is. We either deal with it or we turn away and we look away. And the question is, how much longer will we who are blessed with a buffer and the illusion of peace, how much longer will we be blessed with the opportunity to look away? Because these kinds of conflicts are not isolated, they are spreading, and they involve cultures, not just people, but these are cultures that live in every nation of the planet. So what do we do? What do we do? I wouldn't talk to you about this if there wasn't something that we could do. The first thing is I'm going to invite you, and this means being proactive on your part. You have to recognize when you're being manipulated. When you see or you hear information that triggers in your gut that primal response that makes you want to do something that betrays your true nature, and you have to decide what that is. When you see images and when you hear information that makes you into something that you're not, I want you to know that you're being manipulated, and that manipulation is happening on a lot of levels. You know, fundamentally, there's a battle between light and dark on this planet. There's a battle between good and evil. There's a battle for our planet itself. I talk about that in a separate video. And there's a battle for your thoughts. There's a battle for your beliefs. There's a battle for your body. There's a battle for your humanness. All of those I talk about in other videos. Just want you to be aware when information makes you feel that you want to betray your truest nature, there's a good chance you're being manipulated. So I want you to recognize that. You don't have to judge it. Just say, yeah, you know, I think I'm being manipulated. Now, let's look a little bit deeper. How do you win? If you think, this is a trick question. If you think in terms of winning and losing, you are definitely being manipulated. You are definitely being manipulated because this is the thinking. The win and the lose is the thinking that keeps us locked into, it keeps us stuck into the thinking that perpetuates the horrors of war on this planet. We're not talking about winning. You don't want to win. What you want to do, forget about winning. You want to triumph. You want to transcend. You want to prevail above the polarities that are happening. And you cannot do that if you are stuck in the polarities, in that polarity thinking. Now, I want to be really clear. It doesn't mean that you don't fight. Sometimes we have to fight. The question is, what do we become in the presence of the fight? And what is motivating us into the fight? People have said to me, and I did this in the past video, some people say, Greg, you're splitting hairs. If you fight, you fight. Well, on a spiritual level, that's not true. On a spiritual level, we are all battling for our very humanness. And sometimes to preserve our humanness, we have to, if the conditions are not addressed early on when things go awry, all right, there are times we know that we have to fight. What comes to mind, obviously for me and many people, is what happened in Europe in World War II. There were so many opportunities to nip the Third Reich in the bud, and people turned away. Some people profited from the war. Companies are playing both sides of the war, selling munitions to both sides. They wanted to keep that war going. It got out of hand. And because it was not addressed early on, there was a time where a fight had to happen. And we'd live in a very different world if that fight had not happened. So I'm not saying that we don't sometimes have to fight. We all have a warrior within us, our inner warrior. Here's the key, and I think this is so powerful right now because of where we're living, the time we're living in, the cycles of the spiritual evolution. What do we become in the presence of that fight? Do we become the bitter and the hate? Do we lose our humanness and dehumanize one another in the fight? Or do we fight from the love of what we know is true in our hearts and our desire to preserve the love and the blessings that we've been given for future generations? It's a whole conversation that we can have. It's an important conversation. How do you triumph? You move beyond this idea of winning and losing. You triumph, you prevail. Knowledge is the key to this. We've all heard that knowledge is power. Here's the question: where do you get your knowledge from? And I run even my colleagues, people that you know, authors of other books, speakers that you and I share on a stage in conferences all over the world, are polarized right now. There's some of them, my friends, that I cannot even speak to right now because the polarization is so great. Others are afraid to speak out, and they are conspicuously absent and silent on the world stage. Many of these speakers are not saying a word because they're afraid to speak out of what they truly believe. They don't want the backlash. They don't want the threats if they share their opinions. Where does your information come from? Are you being manipulated through that information? And we just went through, the first part of this conversation to know when that's happening. If you are, I'm not saying don't watch this. I watch CNN when I'm traveling, the CNN app, because the images will show what's happening. It's the commentary that guides and directs your thoughts about the images. That's the key. And I got to tell you, man, these people are really, and I like them. I like many of the personalities that we've grown accustomed to and that we feel comfort seeing. In times of tragedy, we turn and we want to see those familiar faces. I'm not saying don't watch it. I'm saying what I'm saying to you is you owe it to yourself to do your due diligence, listen to what they're saying. And if it's coming from one of these 6 corporations, there's a good chance that there's a narrative that they're being told to drive home and that you are now listening to that narrative. So listen to it. And then I'm going to invite you to do something else. Go to alternative sources of information. Seek out alternative sources. Remember, 90% of the information in the US is from being driven by those 6 corporations. That leaves 10% out there. And they're unfortunately, I do not know of a single, just one alternative source of information to go to, because all of them have a bias of some kind or another. What I do, and I know it takes time to do this, I'm acknowledging that, is I will seek out news feeds from other parts of the world. And I'm not saying all of them are 100%, but what I'm saying is you will get perspectives and you will see images that are not allowed in the United States. And those perspectives and those images will help to shape your response to what you see happening in the world. So there are all kinds of news feeds coming out of Asia, coming out of India, some European, independent European news sources. Some are based in the United States, English versions of those other networks as well. You owe it to yourself. If you're going to participate in this world, you owe it to yourself to seek alternative sources of information. What do you do about the economic warfare? Well, if you are plugged into the system that we have right now, there's not a lot you can do. You're going to have to go with wherever that system goes. You're going to feel the pinch of the inflation, which is eating away at your life savings right now at about the rate of 20% per year is what the true inflation numbers are. When you look at all the things that, they don't look at the things like energy and food when they're calculating inflation. We all know that. They used to, and they took those out of the algorithm to give a very, very different reading. So if you're plugged into the system, the inflation is eating away at your education fund for your kids, at your life savings, at your retirement, your IRA, your 401k, if you're invested in the markets at all. You are seeing that happen. Interest rates are rising, and they're going to continue to rise for a while. And you're seeing that happen if you're plugged into the system. Your money is losing its value if you're plugged into the system. So what do? Well, seek out alternative forms. Now, there's two things of money, currency, and economies. Here's what I mean by that. First of all, money is what has been around for 5,000 years. Money is what is used in exchange for the spiritual energy that we expend as we provide the world with goods or services or information. So when we go to work, falls typically into one of those three categories. We're expending our spiritual energy to provide information, goods, or services. We're being compensated with something of value. All right. So money is something that is real, concrete, tangible. It's like food. It's like water. It's like land. It's like precious metals. And precious metals have been used for over 5,000 years. I think they are still useful. There are young people out there that say they're obsolete because digital currencies are replacing them. And we're talking about blockchain technologies. Bitcoin was the first. There are people in the United States, people in the United States government, people in the United States banking system that are sharing misinformation and disinformation, frightening people away from using Bitcoin specifically. This is very complex. I've got two videos on this. I'm going to invite you to see if you haven't seen them. Bitcoin is a blockchain technology. Blockchain technology is modeled after the way information is stored in the DNA of all life. All right. Every transaction that happens, every chemical transaction that happens in the life of that biological being and the beings that came before it are transparent in the genome. They are immutable. You cannot change them. They're secure because they are locked into that biological system. That is the basis for blockchain technology. And Bitcoin was the first example of that, the most transparent form of money that we've ever seen. You can track every transaction up to the moment where you own or you're engaged in a Bitcoin transaction. It's out there, which pretty much blows the theory that it's used by crooks and criminals. That's one of the misinformation pieces that you're hearing from our esteemed Congress people and representatives that simply feel threatened by this technology. They want us locked into the old banking system because they're benefiting from that banking system. So what I want to say is Bitcoin is the most secure system. It's never been hacked. The platforms that you use to access it have been hacked, just like banks can be hacked, but the dollar itself isn't hacked. All right, the platforms to distribute the Bitcoin have been hacked, but the Bitcoin itself has never been hacked because it is so secure. And again, I'm probably not doing justice to this. I've got two complete videos on this. But what I want to say is alternative sources of money and currency, because you can use Bitcoin, you can use precious metals as currency as well, and economies. There are alternate economies that are now emerging, bypassing centralized economies, centralized banks that have to control all of the transactions, that can deny transactions. I'm not saying don't use them. I'm saying that if you put all your eggs in one basket and that basket fails, then you know where that leaves you. And I think you owe it to yourself to look for alternative forms of economy. Again, I have separate videos on this, but these are available. And this is how you triumph in economic warfare. All right. So these three: information, economy, psychological warfare, those are what make this the other things possible. The psychological warfare, what do we do about that? I have videos. I have an entire course that addresses this. The key to psychological warfare is resilience. Resilience occurs across domains. Those domains are physical resilience, emotional, psychological, mental, and spiritual resilience. I've got a course called Radical Resilience that addresses each of these. There are other people, other speakers, other courses, really good people that talk about each of these. The key is most people will only address one or two. And to find true resilience in the presence of what we're seeing in the world today, we need to consider all five. It all comes down to how you see yourself in the world. The world we're living in right now, you've got to have an emotional anchor. You've got to have a spiritual anchor. You've got to have a strong spiritual compass that tells you beyond a shadow of a doubt, number one, who you are. Number two, how you relate to the world around you. Because if you do not have those two things, the fifth generational warfare is going to show up in your life in ways that will frighten you into making choices that may not be in your best interest. Okay, that's the way I'm going to say this. So this is what we do about the psychological warfare. So the outer war, the political, cyber, kinetic warfare, it's only possible based upon the way we think of ourselves through the information, the way that we feel about the economy and the psychological warfare. This is how we have the opportunity to rise above, to transcend. All of this becomes hybrid warfare. So what do we do? What do we do? All of this is being used to drive us, to polarize us within the family unit. I'm going to go beyond that. It's being used to polarize us within ourselves. How many of you are feeling torn about what's right and what's wrong and what's happening in the world and the choices that you make? And in that feeling, you turn to someone else and they're feeling torn and they're getting their information from a different place than you are. We're turning to things outside of us. You'll look for other sources of information to validate where you are. Here's the thing, you can only be polarized when you allow yourself to be manipulated. All right, now, this is one of those places, again, I've done entire video conferences on this and interviews and podcasts with other people. There is a concerted effort in the United States of America to break the social bonds that have held us together as a society. When those bonds are broken, our nation is weak and we become vulnerable to the ideas and the agendas of other people that want to change this nation, America, and to make this world, our planet, a very different planet for a lot of reasons that I've talked about in those other videos. How is it happening? Our social bonds, beginning around 2011, if you remember this, I'm going to use this as an example, the Occupy movement, the rich against the poor, the 99% against the 1%. Is that a fact? Yes. Is it an important conversation? Yes. Do we need to talk about it? Yes, in a kind way that leads us to resolve these differences in a healthy way so that we become a stronger union, so that we become stronger families and societies and communities and a stronger nation. But look what happened. It was weaponized and it was used to, and it still is, it's still ongoing, used to polarize us, all right? That same principle then happened against between men and women in the Me Too movement. Important conversation, we need to have it. It was turned against us. It was weaponized to drive us and polarize us as a society, and it has done that very effectively. I can go on down the line. It happened with blacks against whites. It happened with Christians against Muslims. It happened with Jews against Muslims. Now the lines are being drawn at an even finer level. The lines are being blurred at a finer level. The lines are being blurred between adult and child, between male and female. And again, all of these are important conversations. We need to have them. The key is they're being weaponized to divide us rather than being points of conversation that bring us together in a healthy way. Can you see what's happening here? All right. It's all being done through fifth generational warfare. That's not spontaneous. It's not an accident that these things are happening right now. Our nation is being softened up by breaking the social bonds before whatever it is that comes next. And I think we all sense something is on the horizon. We've got videos on that. It's a whole different conversation. The point is, You can only be polarized. The bonds of your society can only be broken when you allow yourself to be manipulated. And recognizing what it is that we're talking about right now is the first step to know that that's happening and to lead you at least into an awareness. Maybe you want to be manipulated. Maybe it's easier. And I'm going to acknowledge this. I have friends that say, you know, it's a lot easier and a lot less stressful just to go along with wherever the energy of the world is leading us. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. It is easier. It is less stressful. The question is, whose agenda are we following, and what kind of world is on the other side? Is the world of freedom, where we have the freedoms that we enjoy right now of imagination and creativity, the freedoms of movement and of expression? Is that the world that we're moving toward? And if it's not, is that the world that you want yourself and your children to live in? Just because it's easier and less stress doesn't necessarily mean it's the best and the healthiest thing for us. But you have to make that decision for yourself. And that's why I'm sharing this. I want you to know how you and me are being influenced to make the kinds of decisions. And these aren't decisions, you know, that are happening 5 and 10 years down the road. These are decisions that are on the table for us right now. They're front and center. Technology in our bodies, the transhuman movement, the climate change and what's being called the war on climate, what's happening in the Middle East with Israel and with Gaza, with Palestinians, all of that needs to be talked about to bring us together in unity rather than polarize us. And that's what's happening is fifth generational warfare is driving us apart, separating us from one another. And I wanted you to be clear and to have some structure around how that's happened if you sense something is not right, because we're all a part of this. All right. This is what I wanted to say to you today. What do we do about all of this? I think perhaps the best answer comes from a visionary who's no longer with us. Buckminster Fuller was a visionary who's also an architect. You may, if you're not familiar with his name, I know you know his work. He was the architect of what we now call the geodesic dome and how that geodesic dome is used in architecture. I was a big fan. He died in the early 1980s, a big fan of Buckminster Fuller, a man ahead of his time. And there was one statement that he made that has stuck with me since I was working as a senior computer systems designer in the Cold War years in that industry. And what he said is simply this. He said, you're never going to change the world by fighting against the things you don't like. He said, if you want a better world, find a new way that makes the old way obsolete. People will follow the new way and the old way will fall away. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. If we engage with the hate and the rhetoric that drives that hate, it changes the chemistry in our bodies. It makes us into something that betrays our truest nature. It keeps us stuck in the ancient trap that defines good and evil and right and wrong. We are a generation that can rise above that and in that way transcend. There is a battle between light and dark. There is a battle between good and evil. And I believe that we need to acknowledge that, but to engage in a spiritually evolutionary, elevated way that allows us to once and for all to transcend. That's a very, very different way of thinking for a lot of people. I know that. I'm going to invite you to think about it. Drop me a note, drop me a comment if they allow comments on this video. Let me know what you think. Hope this has been useful for you today. And I just want to say how much I appreciate you. Man, this is a tough time in the world. It's a tough time on the planet. And I know we're all doing the best we can. I'm going to do the best I can do to give you the tools, not to tell you what to do. I'd never attempt to do that, but to give you the tools so that you can make your own choices based on your own information and wherever you feel that information leads you. That is how I may serve you. So this is what I wanted to say to you today about fifth generation warfare. Hope it's been useful. Thank you for sharing a little bit of your day with me today. I look forward to our next.